Order. Before I call the Prime Minister, I wish to make a short statement. I regret that the main elements of the Prime Minister's statement were announced over the weekend. I understand that the statement was due to be made today, but was brought forward due to the leaks to the media. After speaking with the Prime Minister and Leader of the House, who went to great lengths to reassure me that the leaks were not from Downing Street, I expect the Prime Minister to keep the House updated on this leak inquiry. I also hope that if the leaker is identified, and if a member of this House, that member will make a full apology to the House of the discourteous and unacceptable behaviour. I would also like to point out that the British Sign Language interpretation for this statement is available to watch on the Parliamentary live TV. Prime Minister!
Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I will make a statement on the measures we must now take to contain the autumn surge of coronavirus, protect our NHS and save lives. On Saturday evening, the Chief Medical Officer and the Chief Scientific Advisor described the remorseless advance of this second wave. The extraordinary efforts being made by millions of people across the country, especially by those in very high alert areas, have made a real difference, suppressing the R rate below where it would otherwise have been. But the R is still above 1 in every part of England, as it is across much of Europe, and the virus is spreading even faster than the reasonable worst-case scenario. There are already more COVID patients in some hospitals now than at the height of the first wave. 2,000 more this Sunday than last Sunday. While the prevalence of the virus is worse in parts of the north, the doubling time in the southeast and the Midlands is now faster than in the northwest, even in the southwest, where incidence remains low. Current projections mean they will start to run out of hospital capacity in a matter of weeks. And the modelling presented by our scientists suggests that without action, we could see up to twice as many deaths over the winter as we saw in the first wave. Faced with these latest figures, there is no alternative but to take further action at a national level. I believe it was right to try every possible option to get this virus under control at a local level with strong local action and strong local leadership. And I reject any suggestion that we are somehow slower in taking measures than our European friends and partners. In fact, we're moving to national measures when the rate both of deaths and infections, for instance, is lower than they were in France. We are engaged as a country in a constant struggle to protect lives and livelihoods, and we must balance the restrictions we introduce against the long-term scars they leave, whether for businesses and jobs or our physical and mental health. No one wants to impose measures unless absolutely essential. So it made sense to focus initially on the areas where the disease was surging and not to shut businesses, pubs and restaurants in parts of the country where incidence was low. I want to thank the millions who have put up with local restrictions, sometimes for months on end. I want to thank them and the local leaders who've understood the gravity of the position. And we will continue as far as possible to adopt a pragmatic and local approach in the months ahead. But we are fighting a disease, Mr. Speaker. When the data changes course, we must change course too. And to those in this House who believe we should resist further national measures, let me spell out the medical and moral disaster we face. If we allow our health system to be overwhelmed, exactly as the data now suggests, then that would not only be a disaster for thousands of COVID patients, because their survival rates would fall, we would also reach a point where the NHS was no longer there for everyone. The sick would be turned away because there was no room in our hospitals. That sacred principle of care for anyone who needs it, whoever they are, and wherever, whenever they need it, could be broken for the first time in our lives. Doctors and nurses could be forced to choose which patients to treat, who would live, and who would die. And this existential threat to our NHS comes not from focusing too much on coronavirus, but from not focusing enough. If we fail to get coronavirus under control, it is the sheer weight of demand from COVID patients that would deprive others of the care they need. Cancer treatment, heart surgery, other life-saving procedures, all this could be put at risk if we do not get the virus under control. And even though we are so much better prepared than before, with stockpiles of PPE and ventilators, the Nightingales on standby, and 13,000 more nurses than last year, I'm afraid the virus is doubling faster than we could conceivably add capacity. Even if we doubled capacity, the gain would be consumed in a single doubling of the virus. And so on Wednesday, the House will vote on regulations which, if passed, will mean that from Thursday until the 2nd of December in England, people will only be permitted to leave home for specific reasons, including for education, for work, if you cannot work from home, for exercise and recreation outdoors, with your household or on your own, or with one person from another household or support bubble, for medical reasons, appointments, and to escape injury and harm, to shop for food and essentials, and to provide care for vulnerable people or as a volunteer. Essential shops will remain open and click and collect services will continue, so people do not need to stock up. But I'm afraid that non-essential shops, leisure and entertainment venues, and the personal care sector will all be closed. Hospitality must close except for takeaway and delivery services. Places of worship can open for individual prayer, funerals, and formal childcare, but sadly not for services. However, Remembrance Sunday events can go ahead, provided they are held outside and observe social distancing. Workplaces should stay open where people can't work from home, for example, in construction or manufacturing. Elite sport will also be able to continue. Single adult households can still form exclusive support bubbles with one other household, and children will still be able to move between homes if their parents are separated. The clinically vulnerable and those over 60 should minimize their contact with others. And while we will not ask people to shield again in the same way, the clinically extremely vulnerable should only work from home. Mr. Speaker, I am truly sorry for the anguish these measures will impose, particularly for businesses which have just got back on their feet. Businesses across the country who have gone to such trouble to make themselves COVID secure, to install perspex screens, to do the right thing. Each of these actions, Mr. Speaker, has helped to bring the R down, and their hard work, your hard work, will stand them in good stead, will stand you in good stead. But it is now clear that we must do more together. So the government will continue to do everything possible to support jobs and livelihoods in the next 4 weeks, as we have throughout. We protected almost 10 million jobs with furlough, and we're now extending the scheme throughout November. We've already paid out £13.7 billion to help the self-employed. And I can announce today that for November, we will double our support from 40 to 80% of trading profits. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, will also extend the deadline for applications to COVID loan schemes from the end of this month to the end of next, to ensure that small businesses can have access to additional loans if required. We are not going back to the full-scale lockdown of March and April, and there are ways in which these measures are less prohibitive. We have, for instance, a moral duty to keep schools open now, that it is safe to do so, because we must not let this virus damage our children's futures. So schools will remain open, colleges, universities, childcare, and early years settings. And I am pleased that this will command support, Mr. Speaker, across this House. It's also vital that we continue provision for non-COVID healthcare, so people should turn up to use the NHS, to get their scans, turn up for appointments, and collect treatments. Mr. Speaker, let me stress that these restrictions are time limited. After 4 weeks, on Wednesday, the 2nd of December, they will expire, and we intend to return to a tiered system on a local and regional basis according to the latest data and trends, and the House will have a vote to agree the way forward. We have updated the devolved administrations on the action we're taking in England, and will continue to work with them on plans for Christmas and beyond. And while scientists are bleak in their predictions over the short term, they are unanimously optimistic about the medium and the long term. And if the House asks me, Mr. Speaker, what is the exit strategy, what is the way out, let me be as clear as I can. The way out is to get the R down now, to beat this autumn surge, and to use this moment to exploit the medical and technical advances we are making to keep it low. We now have not only the much better medication, the prospect of a vaccine, we have the immediate prospect of many millions of cheap, reliable, and rapid turnaround tests with the result in minutes. Trials have already shown that we can help suppress the disease in hospitals, schools, and universities by testing large numbers of NHS workers, children, teachers, and students. These tests, crucially, identify people who are infectious but who do not have symptoms, allowing them immediately to self-isolate and stop the spread of the disease, and allowing those who are not infectious to continue as normal. This means that, unlike the spring, it's possible to keep these institutions open and still stop the spread of the disease. And so over the next few days and weeks, we plan a steady but massive expansion in the deployment of these quick turnaround tests, which we will be manufacturing in this country, applying them in an ever-growing number of situations, from helping women to have their partners with them in labour wards when they're giving birth, to testing whole towns and even cities. The army has been brought in to work on the logistics, and the programme will begin in a matter of days. Mr. Speaker, we have dexamethasone, the first validated life-saving treatment for the disease, pioneered in this country. We have the real prospect of a vaccine, as I say, in the first quarter of next year. And we have ever more sophisticated means of providing virtually instant tests. I believe that these technical developments, taken together, will enable us to defeat the virus by the spring, as humanity has defeated every other infectious disease, and I'm not alone in this optimism. But I cannot pretend that the way ahead is easy or without painful choices for us all. And so for the next 4 weeks, I must again ask the people of this country to come together to protect the NHS and to save many thousands of lives. And Mr. Speaker, I commend this statement to the House.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement and for his call on Saturday to brief me on developments? Mr. Speaker, the central lesson from the first wave of this virus was that if you don't act early and decisively, the cost will be far worse. More people will lose their jobs, more businesses will be forced to close, and tragically, more people will lose their loved ones. The Prime Minister and the Chancellor failed to learn this lesson. As a result, this lockdown will be longer than it needed to be, at least 4 weeks. It will be harder. We've just missed half term, and the human cost will be higher. On the 21st of September, when the government's own scientist, SAGE, recommended an urgent 2 to 3 week circuit break, there were 11 deaths from COVID-19 and just over 4,000 COVID infections. For 40 days, the Prime Minister ignored that advice. And when he finally announced a longer and deeper national lockdown on Saturday, those figures had increased to 326 deaths a day and 22,000 COVID cases. That, Mr. Speaker, is the human cost of the government's inaction. The reality is that the two pillars of the Prime Minister's strategy, the £12 billion track and trace and regional restrictions, have not only failed to stop the second wave, they've been swept away by it. At every stage, the Prime Minister has been too slow, behind the curve. At every stage, he's pushed away challenge, ignored advice, and put what he hoped would happen ahead of what is happening. At every stage, he's overpromised and underdelivered. Rejecting the advice of his own scientists for 40 days was a catastrophic failure of leadership and of judgment. The Prime Minister now needs to explain to the British people why he failed to act and to listen for so long. But tougher national restrictions are now needed. The virus is out of control, and the cost of further inaction would be huge. So Labour will provide the votes necessary to make this happen. But we will also demand that the government doesn't waste these 4 weeks and repeat past mistakes. So can the Prime Minister answer some very simple and direct questions? Will the government finally use this period to fix the broken track and trace system and give control to local authorities, as we've proposed for months? We all agree that schools should be kept open. So will the Prime Minister finally put in place the additional testing, support and strategy needed to make this happen? Will the Prime Minister confirm that the new economic package, I think it will be the Chancellor's fourth in 5 weeks, will be at least as generous as in March? And despite the partial step he announced today, will he go further to close the gaping holes in support for the self-employed? And will there be further support for the 1 million people who've already lost their jobs since March? How does the Prime Minister plan to get a grip on messaging and rebuild public trust? After all, Mr. Speaker, this announcement is only happening today because it was leaked to the national papers before it came to Parliament. And finally, can he clarify what the process will be for exiting lockdown? Will it be only when the national R rate is below 1, or will some regions exit lockdown before others? I noticed the Prime Minister did not make this clear in his statement. This really matters because even before this national lockdown, millions of people have been living under restrictions for months. Leicester, for example, is on day 127. And after everything the British people have been through and are being asked to sacrifice again, they need confidence that the government actually has a plan, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. Mr. Speaker, I know how difficult this next month will be and the months to come. The lockdown will be harder, longer and more damaging than it needed to be. And now more than ever, we must stand together as a country, as families and as communities, and show once again that at a moment of national crisis, the British people always rise to the moment and support those in need. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for supporting these measures, and I think he's right to do so. But I make absolutely no apology, whatever, for doing my level best, our level best as a government to avoid going back into a national lockdown with all the damage that entails for people's livelihoods, for people's mental health, for jobs across this country. And that was, Mr. Speaker, our intention. And it is absolutely true, as the House has learnt today and has seen, that the virus has risen across the whole of much of Northern Europe. And that doesn't mean, Mr. Speaker, that it was wrong to go for a local approach. And it doesn't mean that it was wrong to support NHS test and trace, because actually both those approaches, both those means have done a fantastic job in their way of bringing the virus under control, of reducing the R. It's lower than it would have been without those heroic local efforts, and it's lower than it would have been without NHS tests and trace. And he should, in my view, he should stop continually knocking NHS tests and trace, because we need people to self-isolate. And if there is one criticism that I accept many criticisms, but the one thing I do think that we need to get right, we need to see people self-isolating to a greater extent than they currently are. And it would be good if people across this House could therefore back and support NHS test and trace, because it is absolutely vital. Turning to some of the points that the right honourable gentleman made. Yes, it is absolutely true that we are going to protect schools particularly, and we're massively expanding testing for schools. I mentioned earlier on in my remarks about what mass testing can do for particular institutions, schools, hospitals, universities, and others. He asked about help for the economy, for businesses and for the self-employed. And he perhaps didn't hear what I said, that we are massively increasing help for the self-employed, and will continue to support businesses and livelihoods across this country. And I once again thank my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, for the creativity that he brings to these problems. He asked when these measures would end, and they will end, Mr. Speaker, they will end, as I've told the House already, they will end on December the 2nd. And the House has the right to decide and will vote on whatever measures it chooses to bring in. But we will then go back to the tiered system based on the data as it presents itself. Mr. Speaker, he asks the people of this country to stand together against the coronavirus. And I couldn't agree with him more. And all I may respectfully say to him, I think the people of this country would also like to see the politicians of this country standing together a little bit more coherently in the face of this virus.
Dr. Liam Fox.
Mr. Speaker, the impact of the pandemic goes well beyond COVID patients to all parts of the NHS, to the economy and to our personal and social well-being. Does my right honourable friend agree that for this House to be able to determine across all parts of government that decisions have been taken on the best available evidence, that a new parliamentary committee, perhaps time-limited or made up of privy councillors, should be established to reassure the British public that through this committee that the cure is not worse than the disease?
Prime Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend for the very interesting suggestion that he makes. I must tell him that throughout the pandemic, individual departmental select committees have been, as well as the liaison committee, have shown that they're more than capable of scrutinising these issues. But I leave it up to the House to decide what arrangements it chooses to make.
We're heading up to the leader of the SNP in Scotland, Ian Blackford. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is right that the UK government extends furlough as a consequence of the new lockdown measures. It is right that economic support is put in place when governments restrain work opportunities as a consequence of the health measures. It is right that this flexibility to take necessary financial decisions is also held by the devolved administrations when they are taking lockdown decisions. That's why, since the start of September, I've asked the Prime Minister on no less than 6 separate occasions to extend the furlough scheme. And yet, every time the Prime Minister rejected that call. Mr. Speaker, this weekend's last-minute U-turn on furlough has finally buried the nonsense of a union of equals, because people across these islands saw exactly what happened at the disgrace. The Prime Minister only acted when England needed support. When Scotland needed full furlough support, Westminster said no. Mr. Speaker, for many, this U-turn is already far too late. Thousands have already lost their jobs unnecessarily. Many good businesses have gone under, and millions of the self-employed are still excluded. So today, Mr. Speaker, I have one very direct question for the Prime Minister. If requested by the devolved governments, particularly if they need to put in place additional lockdown measures, will the Prime Minister guarantee that the Treasury will make 80% furlough payments available when Scottish, Welsh or Northern Irish workers or businesses need it over the coming months? It is a simple question, Prime Minister, and for once, give us a straight answer to a question that the people of Scotland want to know. No more ducking and diving. Is it yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the answer is yes, because the furlough scheme is a UK-wide scheme, and it applies across the whole of the UK. And it is true that Scotland is currently taking a slightly different approach, but I thought he was talking complete nonsense about the non-application of furlough in Scotland. Absolute nonsense. The Treasury of this country, the United Kingdom, has supplied £7.2 billion to support the people of Scotland, and quite right too, and it has protected 900,000 jobs in Scotland. That is thanks to the might of the UK Treasury.
Sir Charles Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will not be supporting the government's legislation on Wednesday, because as we drift further into an authoritarian, coercive state, the only legal mechanism left open to me is to vote against that legislation. That is all we've got left, Mr. Speaker. If my constituents protest, they get arrested. Given that the people of this country will never, ever forgive the political class for criminalising parents seeing children and children seeing parents, does the Prime Minister not agree with me? Now is the time for a written constitution that guarantees the fundamental rights of our constituents, a constitution underpinned and enforced by the Supreme Court.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think what the people of this country want, rather than delectable disputations on a written constitution, is to defeat the coronavirus. And that's why I think that overwhelmingly they understand the need for these measures, and they understand the need for us to come together as a country and get the R down in the way that we're proposing.
Ed Davey.
In confirming Liberal Democrats will back this new lockdown, can I tell the Prime Minister we will hold his government to account for failing to listen to the scientists, refusing to lock down weeks ago, and costing many more lives? Yeah. Mr. Speaker, throughout this pandemic, many people have been let down by this government. The excluded, self-employed, students, key workers. But I want to ask the Prime Minister about one particular group that's been forgotten: unpaid carers. Many carers have been struggling for months, often relying on food banks as they care for other people. So will the Prime Minister follow the advice of Carers UK, increase carers allowance by £20 a week, the same rises for universal credit, and give these incredible people a lifeline?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to carers, unpaid carers in particular, for everything they've done to keep this country going throughout the pandemic. I'll look at the proposal that he makes, but I would just remind him of the colossal interventions that we've already made, worth 200 billion to support jobs and to support livelihoods across the whole of the UK. We will continue, as I say, to put our arms around the people of this country.
Ed Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wrexham and Radnorshire has around 50 miles of the border between Wales and England. My constituents, who are already in lockdown, regularly travel across the border for work, healthcare and education. Can my right honourable friend confirm that essential travel across the border is not only permitted, it is encouraged, and that the Welsh Government should not be using this pandemic to create artificial barriers between Wales and England?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, well, I understand the frustrations that my honourable friend has, and I know how deeply difficult it is for people throughout this country to go through the restrictions on our normal way of life that we have and that we're asking people to do again. And I apologise to her and to the House for what we're obliged to do, but we must ask people, unless it's absolutely necessary, to stay at home and stop transmission of the virus. And that applies throughout the UK.
Samuel Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, we were promised a Churchillian response to this virus, but rather than a Churchillian response, we've had a response more like Lord Halifax, because while we've had the rhetoric of defiance, this announcement today really is an announcement of defeat. We've surrendered our freedoms, we've surrendered our economy, we have driven people to despair with daily doses of doom-laden data. Can he promise us that once we get past this latest lockdown, that if there's another upsurge, we're not going to get a bout of the same destructive medicine, but we will get a policy which allows this country and individuals to run their own lives and not be ruled by this virus?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I sympathise very much with the sentiments that he expresses about the loss of freedom and people's frustrations, and I do understand that. But I must say that I think that what the people of the country want to see is this virus brought down. They want to see a reduction in the infection rate, and alas, at the moment, this is the best tool we have to do that when you look at the whole national picture. But I am optimistic when I look at the scientific interventions that we have coming down the track. And even the medical and scientific advisors, who are not normally, Mr. Speaker, full of cheer on this matter, are optimistic when they consider the therapies, the prospect of a vaccine, and the prospect of mass testing of a kind that I've outlined to the House.
Let's head to Essex with Stephen Metcalfe. Stephen Metcalfe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank my right honourable friend for his statement? And whilst I accept that we do need to do something to ensure hospitalisations are controlled and that the R rate falls, can my right honourable friend please review the regulations around socially distanced outdoor sports, such as golf and tennis, as these are good forms of exercise for all ages and present very little risk of infection?
Prime Minister.
Well, I sympathise again, Mr. Speaker, with the point that my honourable friend makes, and I'm glad he makes it. All I can say, Mr. Speaker, is that honourable members should get onto the website. Members of the public should get onto the website and look at exactly what is permitted. But the reality is that we have to stop, we have to break the transmission of the disease, and that's why I'm afraid I must tell with great sadness, I'm going to tell my honourable friends, we have to make these restrictions for the next 4 weeks. And I bitterly regret it, but it's what we've got to do.
Let's head to Mary Onid with Liz Saville-Roberts. Liz Saville-Roberts.
Diolch yn fawr, Ifarydd. We've learnt so much since spring, Mr. Speaker. We've learnt that we're expected to act grateful in Wales. We've learnt that the Treasury is only there for us when the home counties of England go into lockdown. A casual dismissal of devolution that costs people their jobs. The news simply came too late. He may not have noticed yet, but the Prime Minister and his Chancellor are fronting a membership drive for the independence movement Yes Cymru, who added 2,000 members in 2 days this weekend. Would he accept my grateful thanks?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm always grateful for any kindness from the Right Honourable Lady, but I can tell her that, generally speaking, our cooperation with the government in administration in Cardiff has been excellent, and I've no doubt will continue to be so.
We now come to David Davis.
Thank you, Speaker. The Prime Minister is clearly and quite properly trying to do everything possible to cut infections and deaths from COVID-19. To that end, over the weekend, a number of eminent scientists called on the government to try to resolve the vitamin D deficiency issues in the United Kingdom to reduce the severity of the pandemic. There have been dozens of studies over hundreds of countries in the last 6 months which show, or imply anyway, that this could reduce the infection rates by half and the death rates by half again, the case death rates by half again. The Scottish Government is now sending 4 months' supply of vitamin D to everybody who's shielded in Scotland. Given its low cost and there is no medical downside, could our government consider the same approach in England?
Prime Minister.
I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend. He's entirely right that we are indeed looking at the possible beneficial effects of vitamin D, and I know that we'll be updating the House shortly.
We now go down to Brighton to Caroline Lucas. Caroline Lucas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Extending support for the self-employed is welcome, but it does nothing for the over 3 million self-employed and freelancers who've been unfairly left out of previous schemes and are still excluded. Huge numbers of those working in the arts and hospitality in my Brighton constituency, for example. Will he look at that again, and will he take one small but simple step that would help? Will he acknowledge that the minimum income floor under universal credit discriminates against anyone with an unpredictable and variable income? And will he delay its impending reintroduction?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the Right Honourable Lady that we are supporting the answers she knows with a £1.57 billion package. They're vital for our country. They're massively important to the UK economy. And her point about the minimum income floor for universal credit is one that the government well understands, and we are looking at actively at the moment.
Sir Bernard Jacob.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for the bitter medicine that he's had to deliver over the last 2 or 3 days? And can I assure him that I will support his measures, because nobody has put forward a viable, immediate alternative that would avoid the overwhelming of the NHS. But what can my right honourable friend do to strengthen public confidence in the government's COVID response? He started today to set out some of the features of what might be called a plan for living with coronavirus, a combination of vaccines and testing and tracking and tracing. Would he consider setting that out in a white paper? And would that include transformation of not just the logistics of test, track and trace, but of the leadership of test, track and trace, so that they can run a coherent and viable campaign to change the behaviour by consent and cooperation, and get compliance and public confidence in that programme? And finally, will he publish more of the analysis and data behind the decisions he's had to take, so that people can understand why the government is making these decisions more clearly, and there will be more transparency and accountability?
Prime Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for all his excellent suggestions. We're certainly happy to publish all the data, and I've tried to set out to the House earlier on, Mr. Speaker, our plan for the way forward. And he's absolutely correct that it does rely on not just getting the virus down now in this 4-week period. That's the objective, but also to ensure that we make the maximum possible use of the various scientific developments, not just the vaccine and new therapies, but as he says, improved testing. And I can certainly assure him that the military will be closely involved.
Corinne Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Bristol South did everything asked of them. They obeyed the rules, a great personal sacrifice. And now they've been asked to do it again because of his government's failure. Trust is absolutely now at rock bottom. So to rebuild that trust, his two key planks are around test and trace and the tier system. Firstly, he needs to sack Baroness Harding. I know she's a friend. I know it's difficult, but it's clearly been a failure and needs to give that £12 billion resource back to the experts on the local ground who know how to use it and to support people isolating. And secondly, he's going to return to the tier system. That's all we know about what happens on December the 3rd. What is the real plan? If the tier system has worked, Bristol is currently in tier 1. Are we to expect Bristolians to return to tier 1 on December the 3rd?
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, again, NHS test and trace, whatever the drawbacks, whatever the frustrations that people legitimately feel, it will achieve its target for 500,000 capacity by the end of October. It already has achieved that target, and I think that's a considerable thing to have done. I thank everybody working in NHS test and trace for their efforts. As I say, we need people to self-isolate to give the system the effectiveness that it needs. And I can tell her that when we come to the 2nd of December, the tier that areas go into will depend very much on the effectiveness with which we've all followed the instructions that we're giving today. And that is the guidance she should give her constituents.
James Sunderland.
Mr. Speaker, lockdown is a necessary evil and comes with a lot of pain. But like the member for South Basildon earlier, many of my constituents in Bracknell have contacted me to express concern about the effective closure of gymnasiums, golf clubs and tennis clubs. Given the proven benefits of exercise and the lack of any clear evidence that these activities have contributed to an increase in the R rate, might the Prime Minister be willing to reconsider the current guidance within the next 4 weeks?
Well, again, Mr. Speaker, I must apologise to my honourable friend for not being able to offer the House a huge list of exemptions to the rules that we're setting out, because once you unpick it, one thing, alas, the effectiveness of the whole package is compromised. But that's why I want everybody to work together for the next 4 weeks, as I say, to get the R under control so that we can open things up again in time for December.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What is the Prime Minister and Chancellor's estimate of the additional economic cost of implementing this second lockdown now for 4 weeks or possibly more in the run-up to Christmas, compared to implementing it for 2 weeks when SAGE first recommended it back on the 21st of September?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the Chief Medical Officer said, I think on Saturday night, there is no right time to put businesses to close, pubs and restaurants. We don't. No government wants to do that, and we hope very much that this limited 4-week action will get the R down. And I think it is greatly to be preferred to a rolling series of lockdowns of the kind that I believe were being proposed.
Long may is clear for Bob Blackman. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my right honourable friend in particular for laying out the scientific data on which this decision is based. Most people will say we are prepared, obviously, to do the right thing in order to eliminate and defeat this virus. But could he set out the criteria that he will use to ensure that we can come out of this partial lockdown on December the 2nd? Because the risk is that things could get worse over these next 2 or 3 weeks before we see an improvement. And people want to know what it is they have to do to make sure that we get the infection rate down and make sure it stays down.
Prime Minister.
Just to repeat the point that I think I made to the right honourable gentleman opposite, the R is above 1, but it is not much above 1. It is not much above 1. And if we work hard between now and the 2nd of December, I believe that we can get it below 1. But whatever happens, Mr. Speaker, these restrictions end on the 2nd of December, and any further measures will be a matter for this House of Commons.
Heading to Lewisham with Janet Davey. Janet Davey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What plans will be put in place to address spiralling waiting lists for cancer services? And what additional support is the government giving to the many thousands of people that have had their cancer treatment disrupted due to the pandemic?
Prime Minister.
She makes an excellent point, and it's precisely to protect cancer services, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that non-COVID patients do get access to the treatment that we need, that we have to put in the package of measures that we've announced today.
Let's head down to Newbury with Laura Farris. Laura Farris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand that the data leaves the government with no choice but to enter a national lockdown. But given the huge consequences that this entails, can my right honourable friend give assurances that the new tools that are at his disposal, and particularly the 15-minute tests, will be sufficiently ubiquitous and effective in the coming weeks to avoid any future national lockdown after November?
Minister. Mr. Speaker, that is certainly the intention, and that's why we're massively ramping up the tests in the way that she describes.
Patrick Ready.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. His furlough is in place until December. The German equivalent is in place until December 2021. That's the kind of certainty that employers and employees in Glasgow North are looking for. So he said that furlough is UK-wide. So does that mean that if parts of the United Kingdom are still in a lockdown beyond December, that devolved administrations will have the resources they need to extend the 80% furlough? Yes or no?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he must have missed my answer to the leader of his group, the Scottish Nationalist Party, and I can tell him that the furlough is a UK-wide scheme. It applies throughout the whole of the United Kingdom, and just to remind him, the UK has already contributed 7.2 billion to Scotland to support Scotland, people of Scotland, throughout the crisis.
Sir Graham Brady.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable friend before Wednesday to publish a full impact assessment setting out the cost of the lockdown in terms of jobs that will be lost, businesses that will fail, and the enormous toll on people's mental and other aspects of their health, the lives that will be lost as a result of lockdown, as well as those that we hope to save?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there are many estimates of the economic impact that the country has already sustained, many projections of the losses in employment that we, alas, expect. But against them, we must set the tragic loss of life that would inevitably ensue if this House failed to act on Wednesday.
We're heading up to Merseyside with Bill Esterson. Bill Esterson.
It's been 33 weeks since the start of the first lockdown. In that time, 1 in 20 people who are a part of the working population have had no work, but also have been ineligible for furlough, ineligible for the self-employed financial support, and ineligible for the business grants and loans. So what is the Prime Minister's message to the millions of people who've had no financial support about how they should put food on the table for their families?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to him because he raises a very important point. We've put another £9 billion into the welfare system, principally by uprating universal credit, and that will go through to next year, as he knows.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This lockdown since March has been devastating for so many people, and only very reluctantly will I be supporting the latest lockdown measures when they come to this House on Wednesday. But does my right honourable friend agree with me that the real problem here is for people's mental health, whether it's elderly people who are in care homes or who are desperately missing their families around them, whether it's business people who are seeing their life's efforts just ruined around them, and also, of course, for families with very young children who are so isolated and frankly miserable. So will my right honourable friend please do everything possible to make sure that this lockdown is a compassionate one, and that wherever possible, we make sure that support for those who are vulnerable and with mental health problems will be supported through it?
Indeed, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we put another £12 billion into supporting mental health care. But the general point she makes is very important, and it's one of the reasons why no government wants to impose these measures lightly, and why we want to make sure that we get through them as fast as we can.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister quite rightly spoke of the importance of strong local action and strong local leadership, but he needs to acknowledge that his dithering and delay and the lack of communication has made local leaders' job far more difficult. Will he and the Chancellor now commit today to talk to the core cities to assess the actual economic impact of lockdown on their cities, and in the first instance, the need for a winter support package to tackle issues such as rough sleeping, food poverty, and, as the Right Honourable Lady just said, mental health?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. We're in constant contact with government, regional, local, at all city, at all levels throughout this country to protect and to help them protect and support our constituents, and we've given about 3.7 billion to local councils, and we will continue to support local government throughout the crisis.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. It's important that Parliament should have the chance to scrutinise the scientific advice behind these recommendations. So I'm grateful to Sir Patrick Vallance and Professor Whitty for agreeing to appear before the Science and Technology Committee tomorrow. But will my right honourable friend confirm that it's his policy to have the minimum level of restrictions on businesses and people in every place consistent with the need to avoid overwhelming the NHS?
Well, that's the policy very accurately summed up, Mr. Speaker. But for better elucidation and understanding of it, I really do urge people to get onto the website and see exactly what they need to do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I accept the need for extra restrictions in order to get on top of the R rate and bring it down. But it is disturbing that the government don't seem to have any specific targets that they seek to achieve through this lockdown. So when we have the debate on Wednesday, will the government be coming back with specific targets that it wants to achieve by the 2nd of December?
Mr. Speaker, these measures are time limited. They elapse on the 2nd of December. But I repeat, the objective is to get the disease to stop doubling, the infection rate to stop doubling, and to start halving. To do that, you need to get the R down below 1. It's currently estimated to be between 1.1 and 1.3. I think the ONS said recently it was 1.6, but it has been coming down. Our intention is to use this period to get it below 1 and get that infection rate halving, not doubling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Unlike some northern mayors who are playing a dangerous game of trying to divide the country along geographical lines, can I say to the Prime Minister, remind him that there are lots of leaders in the north of England, including those in my area, who want to work with the government to defeat this virus and won't run off to the nearest TV studio once they've engaged in that partnership with the government. But can I push him on the issue of mental health? This is causing particular issues around anxiety for many people. Will he ensure that therapists such as talking therapies and those charities that work with those who have anxiety conditions will be properly funded throughout this whole process?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Speaker, and he will have seen that there are specific exemptions for volunteers and people helping for therapists and others, and we continue to put many millions of support into mental health charities in addition to supporting NHS mental health.
Heading up to Manchester with Abdul Khan. Abdul Khan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When local leaders asked the government to maintain the furlough scheme at 80% when Tier 3 restrictions were imposed across much of the Northwest, Northeast, and the West Midlands, they refused. Instead, The lowest paid Northerners were told a 67% wage subsidy was sufficient for them. When similar restrictions were extended to the rest of England over the weekend, the Chancellor appears to have changed his mind, shaken the magic money tree, and returned to 80%. Does the Prime Minister understand why the North believe they are being treated with utter contempt? And can he now confirm that the government will maintain an 80% wage subsidy for any ongoing Tier 3 restrictions after the national lockdown is lifted?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the crucial point here is that the measures that we're enacting today, or I hope the House will vote through on Wednesday, are very different from the Tier 3 measures, and therefore the package of support is appropriately different as well.
Andy Carter. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Small businesses across the North West have been operating under significant restrictions for some time. And I've seen for myself the ingenuity and the creativity that business owners have adapted to as they've also reported weak demand and reduced cash reserves. Many of them are looking forward to the run-up to Christmas for some relief. Can my right honourable friend outline the measures to protect livelihoods and secure jobs in the North West and Warrington South?
Well, I'm grateful to the people of Warrington for everything they've done, and I know that they've had a very tough time. It's been tough to control the disease there, as it has been across many parts of the country, and they've done a great job in bringing the R down. I do think that there is the prospect of a much brighter future ahead if we can make a success of these national measures, open up again in December, as I say, give people the chance of some shopping, some economic activity in the weeks leading up to Christmas and then beyond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We all know that those who want to break up the United Kingdom love nothing more than a manufactured grievance. But I have to tell the Prime Minister that he does nothing to help those of us who want the United Kingdom to stay together when he is the one manufacturing the grievances. His position in relation to the future access to furlough funds for Scotland and other devolved administrations is unfair and untenable, and it has to change. He doesn't need to take my word for it. He can ask his own honourable friend from Murray, the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, because he takes exactly the same view.
But, Mr. Speaker, I must respectfully remind the right honourable gentleman of what I've said repeatedly throughout this afternoon. The furlough scheme is UK-wide. It will continue to apply in Scotland. Of course it will.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, for his statement. And I do take note of his answers to my honourable friends from South Basildon and East Thurrock and from Bracknell. That there are outdoor recreational activities, such as swimming at the Beccles Lido, that can take place in a socially distanced and responsible way. And I'll just urge him to reflect on that. And can he also ensure that indoor leisure and hospitality businesses that are required to close will receive the necessary support to get them and their staff through this crisis?
Well, Mr. Speaker, in all intellectual humility, we will look at all the suggestions that are being made by honourable members across the House. We will look at any exceptions that we can sensibly make. I just go back to the point that I made earlier on. It is very difficult to take out one part of the Jenga block without disturbing the whole package. But I hear what he says, and I can certainly assure him that indoor as well as outdoor businesses will certainly be receiving support.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement today? Prime Minister, I understand that there will be a Barnett consequential for Northern Ireland, and I welcome this commitment by government to that. But can I ask the Prime Minister to recognise that the closure of many sectors in England has a massive effect and impact across the United Kingdom, and in particular, given that so many companies in Northern Ireland supply the English market, and therefore UK-wide supports are needed. So can I ask the Prime Minister, what's extra support, or what will there be for the Barnett consequential for Northern Ireland?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and we're making sure that people across the whole of the UK get the support that they need. I think things have been tough in Northern Ireland lately, and I think the overall package has been worth about £2.4 billion so far, but obviously there will be more to come.
Mr. Speaker, I strongly support these painful measures, and the Prime Minister's transparent reluctance to take away people's liberties will reassure many people that they are absolutely necessary. It won't surprise him that I want to ask him about the testing of NHS staff. In July, Chris Whitty told the Select Committee that he supported regular testing of NHS staff if there was a surge. We now have that surge, but less than half of NHS trusts are testing on a weekly basis all their staff. So will he reassure NHS staff they're not infecting their own patients, reassure cancer patients that it is safe to go into hospitals, reassure the country that the NHS is not going to become a COVID-only service by saying that when we start this new lockdown, we will also start weekly testing of all NHS staff?
Mr. Speaker, we are rolling out testing of all NHS staff as fast as we possibly can, and we're all too aware of the risk of nosocomial infection of the kind that we saw last time. One of the things we're doing this time, Mr. Speaker, is greatly expanding the use of novel mass testing devices such as the LAMP technology, which I'm sure he's familiar with in NHS settings. But where we want to get to, Mr. Speaker, as I told the House earlier on, is a world in which we're testing these particularly vulnerable institutions, hospitals, care homes, schools, universities, with regular mass lateral flow testing of the kind that I've described.
Jones.
Mr. Speaker, especially sport is vital for our nation's physical and mental health. Now, the Prime Minister on Saturday night at the press conference triumphantly announced that the Premier League would continue, but his announcement today means that local amateur football will not be able to continue. Golf clubs and gyms are going to be closed, despite their valiant efforts to ensure that they're COVID safe. So can I ask the Prime Minister to publish the specific scientific data behind these set of decisions?
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to provide all the scientific data on which these decisions have been made, but I think what the House will appreciate is that for any particular human activity, you can always find an arguable exemption from these measures, or for many of them. The difficulty is that to be consistent and to have a package that works, you need to have a thoroughgoing series of measures of the kind that we have described. I bitterly regret that we have to curtail for 28 days football clubs and sporting activities in the way that we are. I bitterly regret it. But that is, I believe, necessary to get the R down.
Let's head to Central Devon with Mel Stride. Mel Stride.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This lockdown will inevitably have very serious consequences for our economy and for the livelihoods of millions of people up and down our country, and for many, many years to come. My right honourable friend has rightly stated that he does not wish to see the NHS overwhelmed, but equally, Mr. Speaker, we do not wish to see our UK economy overwhelmed either. So would my right honourable friend agree with me that perhaps we need a more balanced debate about lockdown, involving both scientists and economists more prominently? And with that in mind, would he consider perhaps the government's chief economic advisor or similar economic expert joining government scientific experts for number 10 press briefings?
I'm grateful to my right honourable friend. I'm not sure that I want to put the government's chief economic advisor through the experience of the press briefings, but we are always aware. We are always aware of the economic consequences and the downsides of what is being, what alas we are forced to do at the moment. That's why it's vital that we work together, get the R down below 1 again. It's only just above 1. I do believe we can do it by the 2nd of December, and then, Mr. Speaker, open up the economy again in the way that I know both he and I would like to see.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Small businesses in my constituency of Edinburgh North and Leith and right across the UK are facing permanent closure. Their rainy day funds are exhausted, the personal investments of owners and partners are about to be lost, and the millions of people that they employ are facing redundancy. Will the Prime Minister give a guarantee this will be treated with the same urgency that a UK government treated a threat to the banks a few years ago? And will he commit to directing major cash resources to small enterprises and the self-employed to see them through this? Any recovery will be built on their backs. What will his government do to protect them?
Mr. Speaker, she's completely correct in what she says about the recovery. It will be on the backs of businesses, small, medium-sized businesses up and down the land. That's why we've extended a massive package of support, as she knows, £25,000 grants, bounce back loans, all the investments that we made, a total package worth 200 billion. But for those now forced to close by these restrictions, grants of £3,000 and £2,100 for those who may not be legally forced to close but are adversely affected, and as she knows, cuts in VAT and deferring of business rates until next year.
Also, I'm pleased in his answer to the Honourable Lady, the Prime Minister has acknowledged the burden on businesses, but independent traders and hospitality venues in Rugby and Bulkington, after a difficult year, we're looking forward to the months of November and December and the run-up to Christmas as their peak sales period. Is the Prime Minister confident that the cost to business in losses of turnover and jobs is a price worth paying? And can you reassure them that after this short-term pain, it'll be back to business on the 2nd of December? And may I just ask him, why can't pubs sell takeaway beer to go with their takeaway food?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to him. I think the answer is again, there's a budget of measures that we need to bring together to get the R down, and alas, when you start unpicking one bit, logically a lot of the rest of it comes out. His fundamental question is the right one. I think the people of this country want to put human life first. They want to save as many lives as possible, and that must be our overriding aim. And it is our overriding aim. But we think that if we enforce these measures properly, and if people self-isolate, if they're contacted in the way that they should, then we can get the R down below 1 in the way that I have described, and we can have businesses able to open up again and to do Christmas business insofar as they possibly can.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister knows that Luton suppressed the virus by increasing local testing capacity to track and isolate the virus, and a huge effort by our diverse community to do our bit. Yeah. With the virus increasing across the country, what protections will he put in place for Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities who we know are at risk and currently disproportionately represented in ICU admissions?
I'm grateful to the people of Luton for everything that they've done, as I am to everywhere across the country. It's worked so hard to get the virus down. It's absolutely true that there are some people, Black and minority groups, who are proved particularly vulnerable, and they need enhanced protection, enhanced testing arrangements, which we put in place long ago, and particularly to ensure that people who are working in conditions where they may be more vulnerable to viral load from others get the protection that they need.
Speaker, I've listened carefully and engaged in many detailed briefing sessions about this latest escalation. But to respond to my constituents and echo members across the House, can the Prime Minister give some clarification on the rationale around gym closures and restrictions on places of worship, especially as so many in Harben and Haslingden have worked extremely hard to make sure that they're COVID secure?
Mr. Speaker, again, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. The rationale is very simple. It is to reduce the overall spread of the virus and to get the R down below 1. That is the rationale.
Rachel Muskell.
Mr. Speaker, charities have been never more needed, and as fundraising opportunities have dried up and retail stores are closing down, charities themselves are predicted to have a £10 billion deficit and yet are providing more and more services. What additional resources will the Prime Minister bring forward to ensure that they can deliver vital services at this time?
Mr. Speaker, I mentioned the support we've already been giving to mental health charities across the country. We will be doing much more over the winter to support the voluntary sector, which is, as she rightly says, does a fantastic job of helping in this crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. People and businesses in Birmingham and Padiham have had additional restrictions on them for most of the last 7 months. And whilst everyone is willing to make sacrifices, that is now taking its toll on our local economy. So could the Prime Minister assure me that we won't just make sure the support is in place to get through this next month, but that when it comes to rebuilding our economy, the government will put the same vigour into making sure we build back better? Give them a time deal.
I certainly will, and it's in order to allow the economy to open up again in December that we're taking the steps we are now. But I do believe that this crisis must be met, as he rightly says, with a huge government plan to build back better, which is exactly what we are going to do.
Let's head up to the northwest with Tony Lloyd in Rochdale. Tony Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister will know that Rochdale, Greater Manchester, large parts of the north have been under some form of restriction now for many, many months. When we come out of this in early December, the one thing the Prime Minister has got to guarantee, and it's something he's not given us today, is not simply that testing will have large numbers, but the trace element of test, track and trace will really work. If it doesn't, he will be letting down the people of Greater Manchester, the sacrifices they've made, and frankly, the whole of the country.
I'm grateful for what he says about the importance of testing. He's right, and the capacity is massively increasing, Mr. Speaker. As I said, up to 500,000. We're now testing more than any other country in Europe. I think 30 million tests have been conducted. But what needs to happen is that those who are contacted need to self-isolate. And Mr. Speaker, we'll be making a big push on that, because at the moment, alas, the proportion, I must be absolutely candid with the House, the proportion of people who are self-isolating in response to the urgings of NHS, test, trace and isolate, is not yet high enough.
Good luck.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend knows very well that the big challenge for lockdown for many people is the loss of agency, the loss of control over their own lives, and the inability, therefore, to control the mental health impacts that follow. He has had to balance, and I understand this difficulty, he has had to balance health today over the implications for health tomorrow. Can I ask him, what is he going to do to encourage agency in local communities, to encourage volunteering, to encourage charities? Because even now, when many people would be getting used to or getting ready to organise Remembrance Sunday services, the government's advice is sadly not up to date today, and I'm sure he will want to put that right so that people can take control of their own lives and actually have agency at this difficult time.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend, but I said in my statement earlier that Remembrance Sunday services can go ahead, provided they are socially distanced and outside. And we expressly, Mr. Speaker, and I think he's absolutely right in what he says, we expressly want to encourage volunteering to help others in this difficult time.
Mr. Speaker, last Friday, 361 beds in Nottingham's hospitals were occupied by COVID patients. That's 40% higher than in April at the peak of the first wave. The Trust has already been forced to cancel operations, and there's still a huge backlog of elective surgeries from the first lockdown. Further cancelled operations will have a very serious impact on some patients' quality of life. But frankly, his dither and delay in Nottingham and going into Tier 2 and going into Tier 3 and now on a national lockdown has made that almost inevitable. What extra support will he provide to Nottingham University Hospitals Trust to ensure that every single one of my constituents who needs healthcare can access it this autumn?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to people in Nottingham for what they're doing. She's absolutely right. It's been a very tough time, but they've been working very hard to get the the virus, the infection rate down, and we will continue to support them, specifically on the NHS. Mr. Speaker, we're making a colossal investment, as she knows, in a £34 billion investment, even before the epidemic hit us, the biggest ever investment in the NHS.
Simon Chubb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Cases in the South West remain lower than most of England, although the numbers are heading in the wrong direction. We are well prepared in Devon with the Nightingale Hospital in Exeter. We must take steps to ensure our NHS is not put under severe strain this winter and keep our hospitals open for non-COVID admissions. We have a duty to protect lives and livelihoods, and our local economy is already incredibly fragile. What assurances can the Prime Minister give East Devon that come December the 2nd, without a shred of doubt, the return to regional tiered approach will happen, which reduced the spread and kept businesses going?
Mr. Speaker, I can tell you without a shred of doubt that these measures are time limited and expire automatically on the 2nd of December. It will be up to and we will go back into the tiered system depending on the data. He's entirely right in what he says, alas, about the spread at the moment in the southwest, but that will depend on the state of the data at the time, Mr. Speaker.
Heading up to Scotland with Carol Monaghan. Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since the start of the first lockdown, we've been talking about the second wave, and we knew the current trajectory weeks ago. So it beggars belief that the Prime Minister ended up having to make an emergency announcement on Saturday. Devolved nations have now had to wait until infection rates in the southeast of England reached a dangerous level, 5 hours before furlough was due to end, before the Prime Minister took action. So now that he acknowledges we are in the second wave, will he devolve responsibility for furlough to the Scottish Parliament to ensure that we can support individuals and businesses in Scotland when they most need it?
Mr. Speaker, as I've said several times today, Scotland at the moment has a slightly different approach. It retains a tiered approach, but furlough remains a UK scheme and available across the whole country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Professor Carol Sikora of the University of Buckingham Medical School concluded about the first lockdown, and I quote, "Many seriously ill people stayed at home. They protected the NHS, but it didn't save their lives." This week, with Macmillan reporting up to 50,000 people have an undiagnosed cancer due to COVID restrictions, what reassurances can my right honourable friend give me that if this House does vote for a second lockdown on Wednesday, that the government will do absolutely everything necessary to avoid a repeat of Professor Sikora's devastating conclusion from the first lockdown?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I understand the point that Professor Sikora makes, and of course, I understand the concern that everybody who has cancer has a family member who suffers from cancer or any other life-threatening disease, Mr. Speaker. And it's precisely to protect those non-COVID patients and to give them access to the NHS that we cannot allow our health service to be overwhelmed as it would be on the current projections. And that's why we have to take the action that we're taking now. And I hope he sees the point and why it's precisely because we want to help cancer patients that we need to take the action now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My constituent, Elizabeth O'Connor, lay in agony for 6 hours after fracturing her hip and breaking 4 ribs, waiting for an ambulance. Her distressed daughters were unable to comfort her or see her when she was initially admitted to hospital. Elizabeth suffers from dementia and lives in a care home. Throughout this pandemic, his government's treatment of care home residents, staff and families has been negligent and unforgivable. The very least he could do is allow one family member to be treated as a key worker for visits to help ease some of this suffering. Why won't he?
Mr. Speaker, I'm so sorry about the case that she describes, and I've met, as I'm sure members across the House have, family members, bereaved family members of those who have lost their lives in care homes, who haven't been able to visit them, and it is an absolute tragedy. All I can tell here is that we're doing our absolute best to allow people to visit their relatives in extreme circumstances, making sure that they have the PPE that's necessary. But what we cannot have, Mr. Speaker, is another outbreak of the kind that we saw in care homes. And alas, the virus is transmitted readily in care homes and between care homes. Mr. Speaker, we mustn't see that again.
Now heading down to Basil and Billericay with John Barron. John Barron.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend the Prime Minister for his statement and will be supporting the government on Wednesday. We must prioritise saving lives wherever possible. But may I suggest the elderly should be allowed more leeway? Given that Sweden recently removed shielding advice for its over 70s, concluding that the general risks to their health from loneliness and isolation outweigh those from the virus, what cost-benefit analysis has the government undertaken as to the balance of risks to public health and society from lockdown on the one hand and from the coronavirus on the other?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're not actually bringing back shielding, as I mentioned earlier on, that we do think the elderly need to take special steps to protect themselves. I just mentioned in connection with Sweden, Mr. Speaker, that actually the Swedish example is not quite the one, not quite the slam dunk that perhaps some people think. If you look at Sweden, they don't, for instance, allow pupils over 15 to get back into school, whereas we prioritise keeping our schools open, Mr. Speaker. And that's a balance that we strike the whole time. It's a balance between keeping our economy moving as far as we can, keeping our schools open, and defeating the virus. And that's what we're trying to do.
Alex Davies-Jones.
Mr. Speaker, we are now halfway through our firebreak lockdown in Wales, and much of the North West, the North East and the West Midlands have faced significant local restrictions for months now. When devolved administrations and local governments argued that the 67% furlough scheme was insufficient, the UK government said that this was the best they could do. And yet, when similar restrictions were extended to England, including large swathes of the south, they then changed their minds and have gone back to 80%. So why does this government have one rule for the south of England and another one for the rest of the United Kingdom?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the answer is that we have a different package of support for different measures, and that's entirely what you'd expect. But there is now uniformity, and it is our view that the furlough remains available throughout the UK.
Steve Becker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My right honourable friend will know the basis on which the Public Health Act 1984 is subject to judicial review. Would he look at the advice given to MPs by Lord Sumption this morning, that now that Parliament is sitting throughout this lockdown, we could increase parliamentary scrutiny and legitimacy of the lockdown by moving to using the Civil Contingencies Act instead of the Public Health Act 1984?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. I can certainly reassure him that this measure is time limited. As for the, and will expire on the 2nd of December, as for the legal basis, the Civil Contingencies Act has strict tests known as the triple lock, which must be met before emergency regulations under the Civil Contingencies Act can be made. And one of these is that there must not be existing powers elsewhere. And the 1984 Public Health Act offers clear powers to impose restrictions on public health grounds. And that's why, despite his very useful suggestion, the Public Health Act is the more appropriate route.
Duncan Baker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No one is more disappointed with this lockdown than my constituents in North Norfolk. It is a bitter pill to swallow. We have consistently been one of the lowest infection areas in the entire country. But the simple fact now is that our hospital admissions in the last 4 weeks have gone up by over tenfold. So can the Prime Minister please tell us and reassure my constituents that we have to now have these measures simply to protect our local health services so that they are not overrun?
Speaker, I thank my honourable friend, and I congratulate him on the clarity with which he puts the dilemma. Even in areas where the incidence has been very low, Mr. Speaker, it is now climbing very fast.
Heading up to Scotland with Richard Thompson. Richard Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It was reported at the weekend that the chair of the UK government's vaccine task force showed official sensitive government documents to an event for US venture capitalists, a move which a former chairman of the Committee of Standards and Public Life described as seriously ill-advised. With jobs being awarded even in the midst of a pandemic, without recourse to open recruitment processes, and billions of pounds of public procurement being awarded without going through open processes, what steps does the Prime Minister plan to take to restore public confidence in the competence and probity of his government, and to help reassure people that there isn't a coronavirus at the heart of his government, which requires eradication every bit as much as the coronavirus outside of it?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank people who are working pro bono on the NHS test and trace who come under repeated attack or on our vaccine task force. And it is thanks to their hard work that the UK is among the front runners in being on the verge of being able to deliver a vaccine. If and when a vaccine is produced next year, and I must tell the House it is by no means certain, but if and when it emerges, it will be at least partly thanks to their hard work.
Greg Williams. Greg Williams. Right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I ask the Prime Minister, please, to ensure that he works with devolved administrations to get a united approach for Christmas? My constituents and businesses can ill afford the hokey-cokey of Wales out, England in, Wales back in, and England back out.
I'm grateful to my own friend. We continue to work with the devolved administrations, and we'll do so throughout this pandemic.
Let's head up to Lancashire with Rosie Cooper. Rosie Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could the Prime Minister indicate what assessment he's made about keeping gyms open during the new lockdown in order to support people's health and mental health in an industry with a low prevalence of transmission attributed to it? I'm having many people almost begging that they be enabled to exercise in this way.
Mr. Speaker, with great regret, I must repeat the answer that I've given to exactly what they are. I've set them out earlier on, but they should look at our website, Mr. Speaker.
Good.
Speaker, I support the Prime Minister on the difficult balance and difficult decision he had to make this weekend, but can I urge him before he signs off on the guidance to care homes to do everything possible to help those families visiting loved ones in care homes and look at things like the idea of a designated family member who would be tested regularly and able to visit?
Well, Mr. Speaker, he's absolutely right, and that we want to do everything we can to enable loved ones to be visited in care homes, and it is an exceptionally difficult dilemma, but we do think that repeated testing does offer the way forward.
Chris Elmore.
Speaker, the Prime Minister, possibly, Mr. Speaker, could be a bit confused. In his answer to my honourable friend Member Pontypridd, he said that the furlough is across the UK. On the 16th of October, the Welsh First Minister asked the Chancellor to extend the furlough scheme from the 67% to 80%. On the 19th of October, the Chancellor told the First Minister it could not be done for technical reasons. What are those technical reasons? Or is it more about the fact that when it suits the Prime Minister, furlough applies to the whole of the UK, and when it doesn't, for party political reasons, it doesn't?
So, Mr. Speaker, we're going back into measures across England, which are necessary to drive the R down, and they differ. They differ from measures currently obtaining in Scotland. But insofar as people across this country need furlough, in Wales or elsewhere, then they have access to furlough. It is a UK-wide system.
Bill Johnson.
Mr. Speaker, doctors are between 2 and 5 times more likely to take their lives than the general population. In 2018, my constituent, Dr. Jagdeep Sidhu, was a consultant cardiologist at Darren Valley Hospital. He was at the cutting edge of medical treatment, but alas could not cope with the pressure that he faced, and sadly, he took his own life. Mr. Speaker, could the Prime Minister therefore agree that it's vital that we do as much as possible for the welfare of clinicians during what is going to be a very, very challenging time for this profession?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm deeply sorry to hear about the loss of life, the suicide of his constituent, Dr. Jagdeep Sidhu, and all I can say is that we're doing everything we can to support NHS care for its staff, their well-being, and their mental health. And I would urge anybody in the NHS who's aware of a colleague who is struggling with their mental health to come forward and seek help.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister please tell the House how many people he estimates were laid off in anticipation of the furlough scheme ending before its last-minute extension, and whether he will make an apology to them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think most fair-minded people would think that this government has done everything it can to support people throughout this crisis, and we not only extending the furlough scheme now, but also massively increasing help for the self-employed, and we've already put £200 million into supporting people across this country, and we will continue to do so, Mr. Speaker.
I agree with my right honourable friend that keeping children in school is the right thing to do. However, across the country, children who have received a positive COVID test are being sent home. Yet there will be circumstances where they return to school only to be sent home again because another pupil will have also contracted the virus within their class. In these instances, will the government consider allowing children who have returned after testing positive to stay in school, since they are most likely to have built up an immunity to the disease?
My honourable friend raises a very important point, and that's why we want to roll out the mass testing in the way that we are, in order to isolate the positive cases, Mr. Speaker, and liberate the negatives and allow children to remain in school as much as possible.
Going over to Stella Creasy. Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A local mum, Mel, texted me this morning. She's terrified because she works in a supermarket and has only recently returned to work after having shielded because she has a serious medical condition. As lockdown is now returned, she's worried that if she shields again, she will lose her job, but if she doesn't, she will lose her life. What employment protection is the Prime Minister going to offer those who are clinically vulnerable in jobs that cannot be furloughed, so that people like Mel don't have to choose between their lives or their livelihood?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I would like to study the case that she mentions, because what we're saying to those who are clinically vulnerable is that they should not go to work. They should work from home. And I'd be grateful if she would send me the details of her case so that we can establish exactly what help she is entitled to, because she should be entitled to furlough.
A bit more. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Keighley and Ilkley have had local restrictions since July, and we are now in Tier 2. Today, we were due to be going into Tier 3 with announcements on that being made last week, but that has been cancelled because we're now going into national restrictions. I cannot stress enough, on behalf of all of my constituents, my local businesses, particularly the small and medium-sized, who are the backbone of Keighley and Ilkley, just how important clarity and clear and concise messaging is, as well as financial support for all of those who are being impacted. So can my right honourable friend explain why Tier 3 is no longer appropriate to slow the impact on hospitals and shine a light on the exit strategy from these national restrictions?
Mr. Speaker, the answer, and I'm grateful, and I understand that why the people of Keighley feel frustrated after so long. But what we've got to do, and their efforts have not been in vain in Tier 3, Mr. Speaker. They have helped to get the R down. They have helped to depress the incidence of the disease. But we must now make a national effort to get it below 1, because it is taking off again. And the way out, as I've told the House already, is to do that now over November, open up again in December, get going with all the technological improvements that I've described, in particular the mass testing that I've outlined to the House already. That, I believe, is the way forward, but it depends on us getting the R below 1 now.
Heading up to Bradford with Imran Hussain. Imran Hussain.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents from all faiths have raised serious concerns about the restrictions that will effectively close religious institutions at a time when people need more than ever the comfort and security that their faith provides, putting a heavy burden on people's mental health. Places of worship have gone to great lengths to put COVID secure measures in place and have demonstrated that congregational prayers can safely take place, with Bradford Council for Mosques in particular leading on this work. So can I urge the Prime Minister to look again at places of worship and more measured policies? And given they have had no financial support since the beginning of this pandemic, can he ensure that they get the financial support that they need?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I really appreciate what mosques around the country have done to make themselves COVID secure, and what's been done in Bradford and elsewhere. And I know how frustrating it is now for places of worship that we have to take these steps. All I can say is that we need to do them as a country together to get the R down, to get the virus down, and we will continue to ensure that people get the support that they need in the way that I've outlined earlier today, Mr. Speaker.
Second, but.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for the statement he's given today. 2020 has been desperately difficult for the whole country, and I know the Prime Minister is committed to ending these new measures by December the 2nd. But many of my constituents in Meriden are also worried about what will happen afterwards. So can my right honourable friend commit to doing everything he can to at least making sure that we'll have some sort of normal Christmas, and at least make sure that we have measures in place so households will be able to mix at least by December the 25th?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and I'm conscious that we've got Diwali, we've got Hanukkah, we've got many religious celebrations coming up in December, and I do want people to have as normal a Christmas as possible, and that's why I think it's very important that the whole country comes together to follow these measures. And I'm sure that if we do, then we can get the R down in the way that I described, and people will have as normal a Christmas as possible.
Send up to Scotland with Alan Brown. Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has rightly stated this lockdown is to protect the English NHS. But when it comes to support, he also keeps telling Scottish MPs that we've just to be happy the extended furlough scheme is UK-wide. If we really are in a partnership of equals, will he confirm that businesses in Kilmarnock and Loudon will get this same level of support if it is needed in the future to protect our local NHS, or is it only going to be available during this period of protecting South East England?
Mr. Speaker, of course, the whole of the country will get funds to protect the NHS as it has throughout this pandemic. And as I've said already this afternoon, there's been £7.2 billion already in Barney consequentials just to tackle COVID.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has an unenviable set of decisions that he has to make. But can he recognise the frustration that residents in East Sussex feel? We have one of the lowest COVID rates of any county across England, and the admissions for COVID in East Sussex Healthcare Trust is currently 20, and there isn't one placed in a high dependency unit. So the residents have clearly done the right thing, but they are faced with a national lockdown. Can the Prime Minister demonstrate to me that the damage that will be caused to East Sussex by locking down on our economy, on liberty, on lives, on livelihoods would be a lot worse were we to do absolutely nothing?
Well, Mr. Speaker, this is a very difficult balance to strike, as he rightly says. But I think that the medical data is, alas, overwhelming, that the virus is doubling everywhere, including in East Sussex, and that eventually the NHS would be overwhelmed, even in East Sussex, with, I'm afraid, catastrophic consequences. We can prevent that by taking the action that we are, and that's why I hope you will support it.
Let's head up to Manchester with Lucy Powell in Manchester Central. Lucy Powell.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I don't know about you, Mr. Speaker, but I'm still not clear what has actually changed from 2 or 3 weeks ago when the Prime Minister was ridiculing my honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, apart from him yet again changing his strategy. As he himself has said, infection rate rises have slowed over that period, and hospital admissions reflect the infection rate from 2 or 3 weeks ago. This was entirely predictable, and indeed it was predicted. So given that he can't stick with a plan for more than a week, can he now give some real clarity about the criteria for the exit strategy from this national lockdown?
Mr. Speaker, what has changed in the last couple of weeks is, I'm afraid, the facts have changed, and the number of people admitted to hospital, as I said, is up every day. We now have 2,000 more people this Sunday than there were in hospital last Sunday. We cannot escape these inescapable facts. And she asked again, what is the exit strategy? As I've told the House several times, the way forward is to get the R down below 1 with a package of measures that I believe carries support across these benches, and to exploit the many technical advances that we are making.
Flip Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say to the Prime Minister that as a Conservative, I don't believe that collapsing the economy is ever the right solution to any problem. That's why I thought we'd campaigned so hard to stop the Right Honourable Member for Islington North from becoming Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister therefore tell me how many collapsed businesses and how many job losses he and his government believe are a price worth paying to continue pursuing this failed strategy of lockdowns and arbitrary restrictions?
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I share his desire to protect the economy, and I believe fervently that we need to get as big a button, as fast a bounce back as we possibly can. But I also think, alas, that the data is inescapable, and that if we are to avert the loss of many thousands of lives, this is the only option we face. And I think if he looks at the statistics, he looks at the sheer number of fatalities that we could incur, I believe that he will agree it is the right way forward.
Not to Rupaha.
Speaker, I've heard what the Prime Minister said about congregational worship for faith groups, and it strikes me sitting here that the measures they've taken at Ealing Abbey, 4 to a pew, every other pew roped off, hand sanitizer, one-way system, are exactly what we have here. So doesn't it seem very contradictory? Does he have any message of hope for the monks there? And also, as someone who might be marching down the aisle himself, for the weddings industry. I had an Asian wedding costumier. She thought she'd be ruined by the restrictions. Now they're completely gone. Does he have any hope for any of these people?
Mr. Speaker, it's all, the wedding industry, in common with everything else, will, we hope, very much be able to start again on December the 2nd.
Bombay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, maternity leave doesn't just mean sleep deprivation. I have been in Stroud, on the ground, witnessing the superb local response from our NHS, businesses working to get COVID safe, Slimbridge Swans going up in their league, and shops opening on our high street. But now the government's telling us to park that and hibernate. Can the Prime Minister speak directly to my Tier 1 Stroud communities and convince them that their efforts have not been wasted, and that all of those COVID-safe businesses and organisations will be out of lockdown in December or sooner if we can provide evidence to show that?
It's of course, Mr. Speaker, because it's thanks to the efforts of her constituents in Stroud that the R is not very far above 1 right now. And it's if we all follow the package of measures that I've outlined today, and we all stay at home in the way that I described, we'll be able to open up again on the 2nd of December. Really?
Speaker, does the Prime Minister understand that extending the furlough scheme on the very day it was supposed to end and doing so for just a month means that in reality, many of my constituents whose jobs were furloughed have already been made redundant by their employers in anticipation of its non-availability after the 31st of October. So can those people be re-employed and furloughed until the scheme's new endpoint? And can he tell me whether people who've changed jobs since the original furlough scheme was closed to new applicants are eligible to be furloughed by their new employers who might not have registered for the scheme by the time it closed to new applicants a few months ago?
Mr. Speaker, I hope very much that people will not have been laid off in anticipation of the end of furlough, because there is the job retention scheme, as there is the bonus as well at the end of the year. But to discover exactly what entitlement